Hi everyone and welcome to Techweek TV, brought to you by Callaghan Innovation. Today we're going to be exploring the urban garden and its untapped value, and joining us for this interview we have Tim Packer, who's the co-founder of Bucket Labs. Hi Tim, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Excellent.
Give me a little bit of a background on you.
So Smart Cities practice, which is really how we look at emerging technologies and help cities make more informed decisions. Permaculture practitioner prior to that, which is about sustainable agriculture and societies, and I run a community garden in Wellington. So those three things kind of make up my cause, which is kind of how we take responsibility and make sure we leave the land in a better place for our next generation.
And for those people at home watching that don't know what a smart city is, what's a smart city to you?
We could spend all day, and I really haven't found a good definition, because most definitions come from tech companies. From my perspective, if I look at permaculture as a basis for that, the ethics of permaculture are care for the earth, care for people and fair share. And I think if we were living in a city that was like that, then we'd be a smarter city. So it's about helping to make more informed, more collaborative decisions for our people.
And what is permaculture, just to break it down a little bit?
Yeah, so permaculture came out of two chaps, Bill Mollison and Dave Holgroom, in the early 1970s. It was started as a sustainable agriculture practice, really about how we get a harvest but leave the land in a better place than we started. It's really evolved into sustainable cultures, and the rhetoric that we heard 20, 30 years ago from permaculture is now making its way through to cities and central governments.
Awesome. What's the one where there's like the fish pond that feeds back into the plants, then that grows the crops, and then it...
Yeah, well, it's much the same, right? They're natural ecosystems, and I kind of think of permaculture as where you just give the ecosystem a bit of a bump and out comes a product, and you kind of leave it to be, yeah? So definitely, and I think in a lot of the industrial sense in cities we talk about circular economies, the principles are all very similar.
Awesome. And Bucket Labs?
Bucket Labs is really about providing broader perspectives. In smart cities, I've spent a lot of years producing data from IoT, sensors, machine learning, and then shipping that data up for more informed decisions. But one thing we need to start looking now is more of a top-down. What sort of key decisions are we trying to make, and bringing data together so that we can understand our city more as an ecosystem, as a more holistic connection of the physical, social, economic, and natural systems together. So Bucket Labs is serving up broader perspectives so we can basically have that more informed thinking.
And how would you rate our cities?
And
how are we doing at the moment in New Zealand?
Generally, smart cities is an emerging practice. We're starting to generate a lot of data in our verticals. So we're talking car parking, we're talking street lighting, we're talking waste management. The challenge that we've all got, and this is not just New Zealand, is how we kind of bring that all together. So it's taking time. I think we need to speed things up generally.
Room for improvement.
Oh, very much so.
All right. I see you've brought us a present. What's going on here?
So that present, it's a wee sensor. I'm using it as my stress ball this week, but it's effectively a laser beam. It's a particulate sensor. One of the values of green spaces and trees, which I think we're talking a wee bit about today, is really they block pollution. They absorb pollution. They also block particulates, which is dust. And there's a lot of dust coming off things like cars that are really bad for us. So having green spaces and trees in between, say, our people in the cars, is a very good thing that helps our health.
Awesome. Can you talk us through the benefits of green spaces in cities?
Yeah, it's a long list, so I've done a wee cheat sheet, I'm sorry. Look, if we think of green spaces as kind of like the lungs of our planet, they're kind of vital, right? I mean, as a key thing, they produce oxygen, which is a byproduct of photosynthesis, but they also sequester carbon, which we all know is a big deal right now. They also divert water from our civil services, so in a city sense, they can actually capture water so it doesn't go down our drains and pipes, and that reduces the cost of our maintenance on pipes. There's also a big thing about what they call island heat effect, with trees shadowing what we call impermeable spaces, which is like roads. We can actually deflect radiation and increase moisture in the air, which reduces the overall temperature of the city, which makes things a lot easier. There are physical well-being benefits just through exercise. There's also mental well-being benefits, and actually there's growing evidence that just certain mycobacterium in the soil create vapours that are rather like Prozac to our brains, so they just chill us out a bit, right? They also increase the house price of residents around green spaces, so there's an economic benefit. And I think for me, and this is really where the community garden works, is they build social connections. We can build communities around gardens that helps people, neighbours and different communities and lots of biodiverse folks interact in a way they never would have before.
Can you talk a bit about why there's an increase, like why house prices increase or rents increase around areas of green space, and then maybe we'll go into your garden as well?
Yeah, look, I think there's just there's a natural appeal having a green space next to you for recreational purposes, right? So, you know, we need more green spaces, and you know, we've got an increasing amount of urban density going on, you know, literally around the world. Everyone's moving back into the cities at a rate of about 1.5 million people per week. So we're getting denser cities. If we want to be happy, we need space, and we need lots of different land spaces to interact with and enjoy. So.
And I know you mentioned Prozac, so for those people at home who don't know what that is, can you give us an explanation?
Well, I don't actually, I'm not a clinical person, but Prozac would be something that affects the serotonin levels in your brain, I think, don't quote me on that. But in terms of the mycobacterium in the soils, they produce a vapour that has a similar effect on the neurons in our brain. So it's an antidepressant.
Right, awesome. So go out in your green space more. You're coming at this from probably a really practical angle. Is that helping you get traction with this concept?
Yeah, so we've developed a project in Wellington. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is that we're not valuing green spaces enough, and when we start planning for our future cities, if we can't value for these things, then we're not going to plan for them effectively. So there's some things we can measure quite well, and there's good models for things like the ecological system services, which is the water, the carbon, the oxygen, those sorts of things, the heat island effect, but there's not good data measures for things like the personal well-being, community well-being, physical well-being. So what we're trying to establish, just as a start of conversation, is to establish a framework of quantitative and qualitative KPI measures that we can take and measure one green space to the next one to the next one, and then we can account for that in some sort of value, so that then our accountants in our cities can actually say, yes, I understand there's value to that. And there's already a lot of work going on internationally in places like London to actually quantify the value of specific individual trees so that we can protect that tree for future generations.
Why would we protect a tree? How do you value a tree? Give me an example.
Well, the pollution blocking effect is a really good example, right? So the evidence suggests, and there's over 500 research papers now and building that suggest that these little particles can get into every organ in our body and kill us. One of the particular studies that I've been digging into is the effect that it has on our brains, and these small particles, they're under 2.5 micrometers, that generally come off cars and other things, get into our olfactory nerves and up into our brain, and they cause electromagnetites, and anecdotally, and the evidence is building, they lead to things like Parkinson's disease, right? So the cost benefit of a tree in between a person and a car is actually a reduced health cost to our DHBs. So there's one example. Does
this also mean that for people who maybe are renting or have their own homes, that they should be buying indoor plants?
Potentially, yes. And there's a lot of, there's a whole another field on indoor vapours, so you know, you picked up that one really well, right? Chloroform coming out of our water, all those sorts of things have an interesting effect on us inside. And in fact, I understand there's a number of plant breeders trying to breed specific plants for indoors that will actually mitigate some of those effects. So yeah, that's a growing field.
How much is a problem? I mean, I can imagine that our respiratory system is getting quite affected from the air that we're breathing and it not being as pure as we maybe need it to be.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't have the research in front of me, but I saw a headline the other day that infants' lungs were underdeveloped because of that. So smaller lungs, less capacity, higher asthma rates, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Okay, so the urban garden, does this only apply to having like community gardens?
No, I mean a green space is a green space, right? But I think there's ecological benefits, there's civil services benefits, there are community benefits in terms of that recreational amenity value, In terms of community gardens, it depends what the garden's about. And our community garden's called Innermost Gardens. It's a fantastic garden in the CBD of Wellington. And our motto is community hands in the soil. So the produce is not just about a carrot. It's actually more about the community connections. And we have some fabulous communities of people that just get together. And just one example, on a Tuesday morning we have a garden day where retirees come and garden, and they get social contact from that. They like planting flowers, but they need help to plant those flowers. We have another great group of special needs children and teenagers, young people that have things like autism, that are really task focused, that like digging, and the interaction between those two groups is just stunning, and it wouldn't have happened without that community garden. So it's a benefit.
Do you think that people in our growing age of technology and always being online, that we're forgetting to get our hands dirty and to go play with stuff and use our hands and get outside?
I believe so, and look, concrete gets in the way of us and nature, and I think we kind of tend to forget we are nature, right? We're nothing special. We might have a lot of egos, but we're part of that whole ecosystem. So yeah, we disable ourselves by separating ourselves, and we should get out more.
So in terms of sort of urban planning and urban design, I mean, as you said, more people are moving to cities, and that's only going to increase, and we are going through a phase of building up.
Yep.
What can we do so that people can still have gardens, still have produce, say if they're living in an apartment or in a smaller section?
Look, it's very easy to create a small garden, and from a resilience perspective, I mean, that's a bigger thing in cities these days. If we get hit by an earthquake, or a tsunami, we're going to be disconnected from things that we normally get to survive and thrive. So, I've always thought as gardening, at a home level is just something that's really nice to do, and it provides you with fresh produce where you know the origins of are, which is important these days. But also from a resilience perspective, I've always been an advocate of just planting a few spuds, maybe running a few chickens and having a little bit of honey. So, beehives, for instance, in cities are just thriving. There's just so many of those, and that's good for bees, it's good for biodiversity, it's good for us, because we can get the calories and we can get the carbohydrates and the protein that we need from those sources. It's very easy. One
thing that was quite cool, so I used to live in San Francisco, and I know that most of the food gets brought into the city every single day because there's no land to grow anything.
Yep.
But I know that the Clift Hotel actually has beehives on their roof, and so they use that space, and so that's quite a cool use of rooftop space.
Isn't that nice? And there's an element of human pride to that. It's not just about a commodity product that comes from somewhere else. It's about, I grew that, I know it's healthy, and I'm really happy with that. So
I mean, family gardens are one thing. Do we really need to be moving to full-scale vertical gardens in cities, and how do we actually do that?
Yeah, there's two sides in my brain thinking on that one. One is we need to be careful about being too technology-centric, I think, with these things, right? A lot of these vertical gardens are quite heavily technology-based, but I think in certain situations they'll be just the right thing. We need to think of the city as a community and as lots of smaller communities, and I think one of the things we're discovering is that urban sprawl is not good for us. Just putting housing in a suburb without any other things is not good for people, so you don't get community development, and the communities are really important for our ability to survive and thrive and be happy. It's about personal well-being, so being able to grow produce, but then also being able to support the farmers that are near those cities in ways I think is important, because we'll always have a scale and a volume issue. Yeah.
It's I guess we're starting to see more of these sort of precinct type developments where you've got an apartment block that will go in, but they've got the shops underneath the green space. Which kind of moves me to another thing I wanted to discuss with you, which is I know that Singapore has done some work where, and San Francisco actually, is because there's not much green space in the city and they've got only a certain amount of land, every new building that's gone in has to have a certain percentage of green space that's publicly accessible, but it's like 20 stories high, there's this green space that's open to the public. Do you have any tips or perspectives for people who are making policy on this stuff?
Well, I'm not a policy person, but the more green the better, to be honest, just simply that, and it's great that that's happening, and I think we've got some looming crises coming up. We've just, I think you saw ECAN last week declare that it's not climate change now, it's a climate crisis or something similar to that, and there's 500 odd cities around the world now declaring climate change a climate crisis. So there's a growing urgency to some of these bigger macro issues, and just becoming more sustainable in our cities would have to make sense, because literally all of us are moving back into the cities. So yeah, I mean, if policy can help us accelerate the advancement of those green spaces and the deployment of those around planning rules, then I'm all up for it.
What do you say to the people that just turn around and think you're being a hippie?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Look, I don't know the definition of a hippie, right? But maybe an aspect of sustainability and livability is kind of something that's more comfortable for all of us to consume, right? So, yeah, hippies have an element of that, and from permaculture, hippies have a heritage. But I think these concepts are more accessible to everyone. So, maybe we discard that term and keep working on it. Yeah.
Okay, so to gain momentum with this, who are you needing to get on board? Is it councils, developers and the public?
Well, all and everyone, in terms of this project, from our perspective, I think we start with a small group. I'm a big, I suppose principally I like doing a combination of theory and practical. I don't like just presenting theory or just practical. So we've established a small group, thankfully supported by Wellington City Council, our garden, Innermost Gardens, and some academics that are all sort of approaching this from a balance of theory and practical. So I think once we demonstrate some progress on that, then we can bring more people along for the journey. And I think, to me, and this is a lot of what Bucket Labs are about, is how do you tell a better story that gets people along for the journey, so we've all got this consensus of thinking to get us there in an appropriate amount of time.
That has been something that we've been sort of talking about at Techweek, which is how do we get the community, the public, to actually start being a little bit more vocal and having a voice and asking for what they want. So then it kind of puts pressure on the people who create these systems.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think the way, or at least the way we can help, is by telling better stories or more holistic stories around those benefits. So if I can then come up with the right framework as a starter for 10, and look, I won't come up with the right framework, but it'd be a good starter to then bring people along, and I think we're doing the right thing.
Awesome. Okay, so why are more green spaces not being created today, and how do you think we can change that?
Yeah, I don't know why there's not more. Maybe it's because we can't value them appropriately. I mean, in terms of cities, we kind of, apart from the value of the acreage and the land space, what other value do we put on them? I don't know of many value metrics that we place on those spaces, and maybe if we did, we could just treat them like any other valuable asset and then plan for them better. So to me, that's kind of along the same trajectory.
How far ahead should we be planning for future green spaces in cities?
Well, at least more than one generation, right? So I don't quote me, but I heard a comment from someone that went to one of the Jane Goodall sessions this week, and I think she said something like, we're borrowing this place from our children. In fact, right now we're stealing it. So, we need to be thinking in terms of our accountability and responsibility to the health and well-being of our children, but then probably their children and their children and their children. So literally as far as we can push that, but at least one generation ahead. And look, trees don't take, they take a bit of time to establish themselves.
It's a bit of an ask at the moment, especially since we do seem to be so short-term in our thinking and our design. Is there any way around that? How can we think more longer term?
Oh, well, look, I think we're fortunate. We've got a government that is really putting well-being as a priority ahead of GDP, or at least catching up with GDP. I mean, GDP is an economic measure, right? Now, hopefully some of the work we're doing will actually put more economic measures around green spaces, but there's also a very heavy play on well-being, which we know instinctively these spaces provide improved well-being. So then with more KPIs and data, we'll be able to put priorities on it.
Are there any sort of countries or cities that you use as examples who are doing this really well?
That's a good question, one I'm quite unprepared for. Well, obviously Singapore is doing quite well at greening. Another one might be Cuba. Cuba were forced into a scenario where they had to survive in their own backyard, so permaculture thrived in that scenario. Yeah. There's a lot of good work quantifying the benefits of green spaces in Europe and certain parts of North America, so that's where I look to the research.
Awesome. And the last question we have for you today is, how does the concept of green spaces fit into that smart city environment? Yeah,
so I mean, as a technologist and just flipping, I mean, we're able to learn a lot more about that holistic ecosystem that really is the fabric of our cities. And with things like, you know, these sensors, we can get down to a level of detail and geospatial granularity that we've never been able to do before. So, you know, you think of pedestrian routes, you think of bus routes, and, you know, how we kind of factor all of our well-being and livability and happiness metrics in there. We can actually provide evidence-based data that then we can make, you know, more substantial, collaborative, informed decisions on how we build those spaces. So I think that's where smart cities and green spaces just happily collide.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to tell New Zealand about this topic?
No, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, and yeah, go out and plant a tree this weekend.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. It was super insightful, and thanks so much for watching Techweek TV. See you later.